Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay and today our guest is Richard Moss. And Richard is a teacher of conscious living. I think that's a great title. You've written 6 books. You've got a 7th one coming out shortly. The book that I've enjoyed particularly is the Black Butterfly, an invitation to radical aliveness. And you also have a new book just out called The Mandala of Being, Discovering the Power of Awareness.
Yes.
So my first question really is, Richard, the subtitle of Black Butterfly is about radical aliveness. What really is radical aliveness to you?
Well, it's what I call all my retreats. I call them radical aliveness seminars. Radical aliveness means that we get past the ego's worries and urgency and things that it needs, and we get quiet enough to start listening to something much deeper from within ourselves. Radical means root or core, fundamental. So what is the fundamental source of aliveness? The fundamental source of aliveness to me is reaching that place inside of yourself where you're really listening to your own deeper intuitive wisdom, where you're falling in love with yourself, not because of any kind of positive affirmation, not because you are running away from or trying to push away unhappiness, but because you've settled and settled into the moment, into the present moment, into the nowness of yourself, and out of that comes this timeless dimension of aliveness that is what I mean by radical aliveness. Sometimes it brings physical healing. It always brings intuitive knowledge. It's like one woman who said, I discovered I love myself, and I never knew I knew that. And that's what thousands of people basically say. So it's a journey to, first of all, a deep connection to oneself, and secondly, to the kinds of tools and practices that you can then use for the rest of your life to deepen that journey.
I know at one point in the Black Butterfly you talk about everybody being on a journey like this and not everyone being aware of it. And I think that's kind of probably a lot of us miss out because things happen in our life that are significant pointers, and because we're not necessarily aware enough or we're too busy at the time, we don't always see them as guides and hints and clues.
But first of all, we try to cover up the fact that we're unhappy. We keep up a positive face. We tell, oh, I'm fine. We do all that. But the simple truth is that not only are most people unhappy, but our society, certainly modern society, is deeply unhappy. So first of all, we have to admit we're unhappy. Then we have to say, okay, the unhappiness isn't necessarily there's something wrong with us. It means we're out of balance. It means we're out of phase with some deeper integrity of life. And if we can say to ourselves, okay, this restlessness, this unhappiness, this dissatisfaction, this loneliness or aloneness, this need for something more is a signal from within ourselves. And it shows up as marital conflict, it shows up as dissatisfaction with our careers and our work choices, it shows up as anxiety. And it's a signal, and it's a signal that's saying, wake up. It's a signal that's saying, take a look at yourself. So 2 things basically drive change in human beings. One of them is suffering, and the other is you meet somebody, and in the presence of that person you realize here is a human being that's found something and is listening to something, has become connected to something, and I want to know what that is for myself. So it's inspiration, and that's conveyed by a quality of consciousness in someone else that makes you say, I want to take a journey. And usually what that person says is, you're already a beautiful human being, and you're struggling with the kinds of things you're meant to be struggling with. And let's take a look at how you can struggle in a constructive way so that as you do your work, and there's always work in a conscious journey, you become more loving, more capable of intimacy, more capable of resolving conflict, more able to appreciate other people, be touched in yourself by other people, more a participant in life and not just a kind of a voyeur and an observer.
But also, isn't there a third way? Because something very dramatic happened to you 35 years ago. You had a very dramatic opening. You were working as a doctor, I think, a newly qualified doctor at the time, and then you went through a series of events that really changed your life.
Okay, so grace. So grace, something comes along and goes clunk and wakes you up. Yes, I think there is a tradition. Probably it's the root of all ways in which new consciousness enters the world, of spontaneous realization or spontaneous waking up. And I had an event that for me was a spontaneous waking up. And I was just turning 30. In fact, it occurred right around my 30th birthday, that specific event. But if I look back, it had been presaged. I was on a journey. I was questing for a long time before that.
And what was the reason you were on your journey? What were the catalysts for that?
Unhappiness.
Okay.
Unhappiness, yes. I thought the woman would be the one that would fill me, and I found that, yes, I could fall in love, but there was only a certain limit to my ability to be vulnerable. And then I'd start pushing woman away. I thought, being a doctor would be the source of happiness, but I found that being a doctor was so submerged my creative life in the world of memorization that in fact, it was deadening me. But if I look back honestly in my life, something inside of me was unhappy in a sense of discontent, wondering, questing for as long as I can remember.
So you were taking an intelligent approach to it. You weren't happy, and you were looking, and you were trying different things, and then something really dramatic happened. And can you just take us through that series of events? It's your 30th
the book
birthday.
You held up, the Black Butterfly,
the Black Butterfly, yeah,
talks about this particular event. Just briefly, though, I was in medical school in Manhattan. Dustin Hoffman's walking down the street. He just gets out of a cab. I'm next to him, and I look at him, and I think, this man can influence the lives of millions of people with every film choice he makes. And I walk into the dean's office at medical school, and I said, I'm submerging myself in memorization. I feel like I'm losing my soul. I don't want to stay here. And he said, well, before you quit, why don't you work with one of our therapists? So, of course, I started into a psychoanalytic process, blah, blah, blah. Then I got involved in Sufi work and Gurdjieff-type self-inquiry work. I was part of an early group with Claudio Naranjo called Seekers After Truth. You were talking about A.H. Almas, Hamad Ali. We were in a similar group. We were in the same group at the same time.
This was to do with the Enneagram, wasn't it?
Yes. Enneagram was part of the teaching. Yeah. The Hoffman quadrinity process had a different name then, was part of that. And so there was a seeking. And then right around my 30th birthday, I suddenly, for a number of days, fell into a state of profound terror without any content. I didn't know why. There was no storyline to it. It wasn't that I had cancer, or I was sick, or someone was dying, or I was going to be left. Or there was no storyline. It was just abject, overwhelming terror. And so I found myself...
So what does that feel like, profound terror?
It feels like you cease to exist. It feels like annihilation. It feels like there's no meaning to life. I mean, if you listen to the voices, if I had listened to the voices inside of me at that time, I might very well have jumped off a bridge or something. But what I did do is I sat down, literally, physically sat down, and I said to myself, okay, watch. And I watched. And I watched, and I said, this is a thought about me. This is a thought about the future. This is a thought about the past. This is a thought about life. This is a thought about fear. And I just named. I just sat there hour after hour, and I couldn't sleep. So I just named, and this naming process of observing and naming was going on, and it was giving me a center.
So you watched the thoughts arise.
Yes, and I didn't have any guideline to do this. This was a spontaneous insight to just watch the thoughts arise. I'd had an image, and the image, I'd had a dream, and in the dream it just simply, basically, I realized that I asked the question in the dream, who has been here before? And the answer came back, Jesus. This was in a dream. So when I woke up out of the dream, I said, all right, Jesus has been here before. I have to know what consciousness Jesus had realized. And I was Jewish, non-practicing, had read the Gospels once a few months before. I found myself crying when I read them out of some kind of recognition. Here I have a dream that says, Jesus has been here before. So I said, okay, if Jesus has been here before, what's that consciousness? And at that point, I started this questioning. And the questioning was this, it's a story about me, it's a story about the past, it's a story about life. This is a fear of my feeling, this is a judgment of myself for the feeling. And I'm sitting in a backyard of a friend's house. She was a Jungian analyst, and she realized that something very powerful was happening to me. I'd called her on the phone. She said, I'll come and get you, stay with me. And in the backyard, as this process, and I was getting quieter as I was doing this process, and the fear was subsiding a little bit. There's this black butterfly, white butterfly, dancing in the air, landing on a branch. They mate, they break off and dance in the air, and the black butterfly, the darker butterfly, lands right in the middle of my forehead. And at that moment, which is why the book's called The Black Butterfly, in that moment I became one. The inner and the outer were the same thing. It was just all love. It had never been anything but love. Richard Moss was there only in the background as a kind of observer, aware of what was happening. And that was after that I could see energy, feel energy, had tremendous sense of empathy with people, whole new dimensions of awareness opened up. And the truth is, saying all that, it didn't change the fundamental part of my ego that was still insecure, competitive. I've had to work on that for a long. It didn't change the part of my ego that had been predetermined by, let's call it the patriarchal psychology of our time. It didn't let me understand what it meant, the deeper feminine quality of life, which is about nurturance and contentment and being. And I still had this urge to do. And anytime I would start to do, I'd be anxious. Anytime I would be fine. I mean, more than fine. And so my path in life has been this navigation between contraction and openness. And I know the path because I listen in my body. I mean, just the slightest contraction, and I know I should be saying something different to a friend or different to my wife or listening more carefully. And the moment I say the truth or listen more carefully, the contraction relaxes. And that path is what I've walked, a path very much guided by my body. My body tells me when my mind is in conflict with reality, when my mind is in conflict with what is.
So when you had the experience after the black butterfly landed on your forehead, what actually changed in terms of the way you viewed reality?
Not a lot, in the sense of some sort of philosophical formulation.
Now, I wasn't thinking of...
I mean,
that.
What changed was people suffer. I suffer. I care. How can I help? And it turned out, as soon as my heart was open, I was helping. I would sit there, tears could run down my face, someone near me would fall, they would just feel safe, they'd feel seen, they would have their own answers come.
But what I meant is, did you have a different reference point for who you are?
Yes, in a certain sense I did. I mean, it's a dangerous reference point, an essential reference point. I had a witness position. I could watch what arose inside of me at the level of sensation, at the level of feeling, at the level of thought. And I knew that I was more than that. I knew that as an aware entity or an aware being, I transcended what I was aware of. But I didn't have identification with the aware self. I basically saw that whatever you'd call illusion was me, whatever you'd call transcending of illusion was me. I didn't feel like I was the viewer of my unhappiness and therefore not unhappy. I was unhappy and the viewer of my unhappiness.
Okay.
I was lonely and the viewer of my loneliness. I was needy and the viewer of my neediness. I always knew. Walt Whitman was the very first thing I read after this awakening, and one of the things he said is, the higher shall not be demeaned by the lower, nor the lower dismissed by the higher. And it's always been my path. It's always been my path. I would rather define myself by whatever I would call small and weak than whatever I would call transcendent and greater, because the transcendent and greater turns out to be a little too impersonal, a little too abstract, and a little too desensitized, whereas the part that hurts and feels and loves and cries, and that part is so intimately human and intimately connected to the wind, the sky, nature, the earth, people, and that's where I like to live my life, so close to this embodied state of being, embodied awareness. So it's never awareness for me, it's embodied awareness. But it's not just embodied. I'm more than my body, of course. But without my body, I wouldn't have any way at all of celebrating life.
Because you talk you give quite a long description in the Black Butterfly of this process, and you talk about at one point that you were merging, like I think that you saw a cow and you became one with the cow, and there was the nature, you were becoming one. So is you had a new, I can't really call it experience, but you had a new reference point of oneness, and yet you're talking also about witnessing. I'm just...
There's an emanation that comes from a realization like I had.
Yeah.
That emanation affects every person that's near me. In the beginning, they would just simply start to cry. Some of them would even get sunburned because there was such a force field that came off that it literally would redden their skin. However, I knew that I had to deal with my fearfulness, my neediness, my weakness. I couldn't define myself by the emanation. I had to define myself by my humanity.
Okay.
So I define myself by my humanity, my capacity to love, my capacity to listen, because that's the more important quality as far as I'm concerned. The fact that a new level of consciousness awakened in me, lives as part of me, is always with me, is lovely. But I didn't do that. So I take no credit for it. It did itself. It's a step of evolution, and it happens to us, and it happens to some people. And this is 35 years later. I have not had to really try to have people around me to work with, because they always keep coming. They keep coming because of the emanation. They keep coming because I'm a man on a journey that everybody can take. Anybody can take. And what I've tried my best to show people is, and particularly in the newest book that I've written, The Mandala of Being, and the newest still, which comes out in a few months, comes out in February of 2011, is, okay, if you're not fully present, where have you gone? And that's the path I live. As soon as I realize I've left, I come back and start all over. I know that who I am is not my history. I know that who I am is not who I'm going to become. I know that who I am is not my thoughts about myself, and I know that you're not my judgments of you, and I start all over again. And when we start all over again, we are a man with a man in this instance, or a man and woman together, or a man and child together. You know, it's life, and life to me is the blessing.
But if somebody is fully present, who hasn't had the experience that you've had, aren't they staying within the subject-object relationship?
Well, subject-object is a stage of development, okay? I would call it me-you. You know, if there's a me, then there's a you. If I'm grandiose, I'll make you smaller. If I'm depressive, I'll make you bigger. I mean, it's a continuum. Learning humility, learning to start all over in the present moment, learning to appreciate another person as other, really enjoying their otherness, and not calling that otherness unconsciousness, for example, or not calling that otherness selfishness, just your you-ness in a particular moment. That, to me, is the wonder of life. I am not worried about whether there's a state that transcends subject-object consciousness. Of course there is. But who cares?
Okay.
But, I mean, who cares? Why identify yourself with a state when you can be a man? I mean, that may not make sense, but it makes absolute sense when you're in a relationship, when you're actually with people. You know, when I'm with a person and we hug, I think, wow, now we're both being blessed. I don't think I'm blessing them, you know. When I'm sitting in a group, working and teaching, and a tremendous field of stillness and aliveness comes, I think, wow, I'm being nourished by the field that my very presence has helped call forth, and these other people have joined to make stronger, but it's not my field, it's what nourishes me. I would no more identify with the transcendent state of oneness than I would identify with my selfishness or pettiness.
So when you're present with me now, what is that experience to you?
Well, this is a context. Someone's listening to us, and I would like this to be as practical in some way as possible. How do they help themselves past the kind of suffering that makes them blind? For you, it's just a deep appreciation that you've decided to do something that's put us together, that communicates a message of consciousness, and you're a mystery. You're an absolute mystery, and I could find you fascinating forever. Just listening, discovering you, we would see common ground, things we agree on and disagree on, but the fundamental common ground of human beings who are aware, and awareness is a I don't know the source of it, and I don't care.
Okay, so somebody who's watching this on TV, and they may be intrigued, they may be very intrigued, mildly intrigued, and they're thinking, well, how can I get a taste of this? How can I be more present? What's the starting point for them?
Well, basically, if you go to navigate with a ship, I sailed across the Atlantic Ocean with 5 of my students, just 6 of us on a 50-foot boat a couple of years ago. You have to know where you're starting from. You have to know the latitude and longitude of where you're starting from before you go. So where are you and I starting from? We're starting from the present moment, always. Okay? We can't start anywhere else. There is nowhere else. Okay? So the present moment is an abstraction in a certain sense. So what is it we're starting from? We're starting from the quality of my attention, the quality of the way I'm listening, how focused I am with you, and how broadly open I am simultaneously. I call it focused spacious awareness.
So what do you mean by quality of attention?
I could be in my past. I could be in the future with an ulterior motive. Is this interview going to lead to some sort of publicity that I like or want? Or I could be in judgments of you, stories about you. I could be in judgments of myself that make me important or inflated or depressed. So the now, this moment, is something unnameable, ineffable, indescribable. Okay? I can watch how I leave the now. So the person who's listening to us, the audience that's listening to us, can wake up and realize there is only now, there is only this present moment, and now I'm caught in a story about myself. This story is a thought about myself that is a judgment making me depressed, or this is a story about myself that's making me self-important, grandiose. Okay?
So it's a thought coming into the mind that takes them away.
Right.
From concentrating or focusing.
The ego is precisely that. The ego is the process of living in the past or the future, in stories about yourself or in stories about others. What is not ego is awareness. Awareness is that quality that allows me to wake up in the middle of a story that's taking me to the past and making me have the same psychology I had 30 years ago, 50 years ago. My father left my mother, and I have the story, I was abandoned by my father. So today, 50 years later, I have a psychology of a man abandoned by his father. This is hypothetical. It's not the truth of my life. Or I can say, look at that. I'm telling myself a story about the past that's producing a psychological state right now. Or I can stop that story and be present right now. That's the quality of my attention. Okay? And I can wake up. So if I wake up, then there is smell and sensation and perception and images and spontaneous deep wisdom that arises. And there is very different kinds of feelings. Joy and love could be spontaneously present, but so could deep, deep anguish, dark, abysmal, what the ancients called the underworld, the mythic story of descent. So the really dark feelings, and my experience is what stops people are the dark feelings, and what I always caution people is that the spiritual journey is not about transcendence of dark feelings. It's not about feeling good. It's not about safety, security, happiness. It's about the ability to stay in the moment with what is. And if it's dark, you learn to stay spaciously. You learn to stay without your thinking moving. Thinking could, because it would move you into judgments of yourself and say, something's wrong with me. It could move you into the future and say, when will this go away? It could move you into the past, and then you'd say, oh, I felt this before. And the minute you say, I have felt something before, the ego has you again. Because from the point of view of now moment awareness, everything is new. Everything is new. So I start all over again. Every time when there's a dark feeling, a difficult feeling. And when joy is there, I know it's not my joy. It's just joy passing through. If it's good weather, do I think I made the good weather? No, it's just good weather. If it's bad weather, do I think I made the bad weather? No, it's bad weather. But there is something essential about how I am present with good weather and how I am present with bad weather.
So when you say dark feelings, what do you actually mean by dark feelings?
Oh man, that's what I went through before the black butterfly. Dark feelings. Dark feelings are feelings of the abysmal. You can't even name them. You'd have to use simile. You'd have to say, it's as if I'm going to disappear. It's as if there'll never be love in my life. It's as if no one will ever love me. It's as if I'm invisible. You have to use as if or it's like, because you can't even name it. And then you'll say it's the fear of death. But that's just a story. It's not the fear of death. It's a sensation you haven't made friends with. Okay? It's a sensation you don't know how to, just like a mother, take a very distressed baby and hold it patiently with total attention and generosity and trust that this baby will be well in a little while, even if it takes hours. My grandson is now going through chemotherapy for leukemia, and he sometimes screams for hours at a time just out of the sheer disruption of his feeling state from the massive steroids and the massive chemotherapy. And to just hold him and know that there's nothing wrong with him, nothing, that his body is overwhelmed by sensation. And this happens to people all the time, but sometimes they think it's because their boyfriend left them, or sometimes they think it's because they're financially stressed, or sometimes they think it's because of health problems. And I always say the worst thing that ever is going to happen to you is not what's happening, but what you tell yourself. It's the thought.
It's the projection into the future.
Yes. Or the comparison of who you were and that you might not be able to be again. It's the judgments of yourself. That's why I call it a mandala of being. Mandala is a circle strongly oriented toward the center, which is now, with 4 basic directions. I can be in the future. I can be in the past. I can be in stories about myself. I can be in stories about others. If I wake up in the middle of all that, I land right back here and I start all over again. And that's life. I mean, that's what radical aliveness is. You start all over again. You start all over again. And that means love is reborn. That means you rediscover your partner. You rediscover trust. You rediscover simplicity, ordinariness. And you just live your life. And you're no longer ruled by fear, because it's just a sensation like any other sensation. It's weather like any other weather, and you make room for it.
It takes commitment, this, doesn't it?
It's practice.
But you have to be committed to do the practice.
You know that joke, tourists in New York City, they come upon a man in the street. They don't realize it's this famous violinist, Itzhak Perlman. And they say, how do we find Carnegie Hall? And he goes, practice, practice. Well, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. People who are listening to us, who think that spiritual journey is any different than learning to master the violin or the piano or some form of art. There's research that says roughly 10,000 hours before you go from a quality of competency and excellence to true mastery. 10,000 hours of returning yourself to the present moment and starting over, and you become Nisargadatta, you become Ramana Maharshi, you become Buddha. You wake up and you stay awake, and you are awake. But we are all masters right now of ego. We've spent 10,000, we've spent more, by the time you're 20 years old, your ego was formed by 5 years old, you've had 15 years of identifying with your thoughts about yourself, 15 years all day long of identifying with your thoughts about people, your sister, your brother, your friends, your school. We are all masters of ego. And ego is a stage of development, nothing more. And if we don't respect it, I mean, if you have a child who doesn't develop an ego, that's a tragedy, because they have no point of view to operate in the world from. But if you look out at the world and you've graduated from Harvard or MIT or Cambridge or Oxford, and you're still operating from ego, then you're just as bereft in some ways as those who never had an ego. because you are going to be living in the past and the future and stories about yourself and stories about DNA. But you're not going to be living right here, starting all over, capable of a deep balance between doing and being, and between nurturing and making, fabricating. We don't want to just keep growing. We want to be able to rest into what we've created. We're very out of balance. So we're masters of ego. Now, if we want to change, we have to work. And if we understand what that work is, look, if you're in a Buddhist community and you're ready for the 3-year, 3-month, 3-week, 3-day retreat, that's a lot of hours of spending time starting all over in the now. At the end of 3 years, you're probably not a master, but damn close.
The trouble is, in society, there isn't a lot of encouragement for us to follow this journey. There's so many distractions, and excuse me, with everything on TV and the press and everything. It's all drama, drama, drama to reinforce people's stories.
Absolutely. I do my 10-day retreats with people. I have a program I call mentoring, where I take about 20 people for 3 years. And in those 3 years, I'm trying to help them establish a pattern of relationship to themselves that starts all over in the now, and give them the tools that over the next 5 or 10 years, they're going to really establish a place inside of themselves that they live from, really live from. A woman that worked with me through the mentor program, her 19-year-old son committed suicide. She called me a few days later, and she said, I had 30 minutes before I had to get home, driving my car. I get this message on my cell phone, and I have 30 minutes to get home, and I know that I'm going to have to start taking care of this and this and this and this. She said, but thank God the work we did. I explored with you all my stories about being a failed mother. I explored with you all my stories about my son and what was wrong with him, and about her now at that point, ex-husband, and how he might have been a failed father. She said to me, I knew every kind of way I could judge my son, judge myself, judge his father, judge the healthcare, particularly the psychiatric system, judge the school systems. I'd had all those thoughts. Since I'd watched all those thoughts, I knew I didn't have to go there. So she said, with the death of my son, and then I heard her say this about 1.5 years later, she said, I have felt things I would never wish on anyone, but I have not for one moment suffered. It's to feel and not suffer. To feel and not suffer. Now that is mastery. That is to feel the abysmal, the loss of a child. I mean, who would want to be? None of us. I've got 3 stepchildren. I've got 2 grandchildren. I don't ever want my wife or myself or my daughter to experience that with her children, or any other human being to experience that. And yet, without thought, it is just deep, profound feeling. And this woman, as she allowed space for this feeling, you have to hear her. She's a slender sprite of a woman. And that voice is coming from a place that is, profound, deep, embodied, conscious person. It's work. There's no shortcut. Absolutely no shortcut. And the people who say, oh, you just wake up and now you know it, this, that, bullshit. I woke up. I've had 35 years to try to learn to be a man in the present and be open and vulnerable. I wasn't transformed. My ego was not transformed by that awakening. A new consciousness came for sure. That's why we're talking. But I can't take credit for that consciousness. I can only take credit for the work I've done since.
So if you hadn't had the awakening experience, how different would life seem to you now, do you think? Do you have any views on that?
I'd probably still be a doctor. I don't think I would be able to know. The only way I'd be able to know is because I see where people spend their lives identified with their thoughts about themselves, and identified with their thoughts about their boyfriends or their girlfriends or their mothers or their fathers, or identified with their aspirations for the future. I think the greatest thing is to try to reach a better future, but I don't want to live my life any other moment than now on my way to whatever that better future might be. And they'd still be identified with the past. They essentially nothing new would happen. The ego will not let you have a new experience. It just takes its old experience and projects some alternative version of that into the future. But there is no real change of consciousness. So I don't know who I would have been without that. I mean, I just look and I think, how did I get here? By grace, by some mystery. But I've had to do my work. I continue to have to do my work. I still do my work. There's no one else who's going to do my work.
So awakening for you is the beginning of something. It gives you an opportunity to see, let's say, life in a broader perspective. And then, as you put it, there's homework to be done, which is ongoing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's, just because a 6-year-old suddenly has an ego doesn't mean they've really learned how to master their ego, to really use it properly. And just because a man or a woman wakes up and realizes the non-dualistic core of awareness, the pure nature of awareness at the heart of everything, doesn't mean that they've transformed their ego one iota. They can still abuse power, they can still manipulate women if they're a man, they can still manipulate men if they're a woman, they can still be needy, they can still not know how to deal with psychological conflict in their marriage. Believe me, there isn't anyone out there that's truly clear. Nobody. And there shouldn't be, because life is too complex. We're not clever enough, even with awakening, to overcome the subtlety and vastness of the human psyche. We are always making a mistake. There is always a shadow. Every spiritual community has a shadow. Every quality of awakening that brings something into consciousness causes something else to be suppressed, either intentionally or non-intentionally. We're constantly having to come back into balance. It's never ending. And I can't think of a better, what's the most, I sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. I've climbed to 22,000 feet on my, in technical mountaineering. I've done things that very few human beings have done, and there are many human beings that have done those kinds of things way beyond me. But the point is, there's no better adventure than the adventure of becoming conscious. There's no more important or essential adventure, but there's no becoming conscious as an adventure without suffering. It is tough. You give up things, you lose things, you discover things, you have to change. Change is not easy. You have to look in the mirror of yourself, you have to see your dishonesty, you have to see the games you play with yourself. The Dalai Lama was asked if he still suffered, and he said, absolutely. Does he still get angry? He said, absolutely. I'm a man, I still get angry. And he's had more than 10,000 hours of practice. So, and that Itzhak Perlman could still hit a wrong note. Seriously. The hope is that we as a species can go forward and do something besides destroy the environment and ourselves, because we are just caught in this notion of insane growth. Think about people that can develop financial mathematical formulas for things like derivatives. They're brilliant. They don't know who they are. They're brilliant and they don't know how to raise their kids. They're brilliant and they God almighty, the lack of holistic thinking out there for people that have graduated Cambridge and Oxford and Harvard and Princeton and Yale. It's spooky. But it's so ordinary. So what's going to wake them up? Misery is going to wake them up. Global warming, collective misery. Loss of species, collective misery. Water wars, collective misery. That's where we're going. We're going to create more and more misery till we wake up. I hope it isn't too late from the point of view of the environment. But listen, we've had some pretty inspirational people out there, and we turned them into false gods.
It's also interesting, I read recently Warren Buffett's biography, and he was, there's two things that came out of it. He was a very driven man. Of course, he's one of the richest men in the world. And he's made a decision now, which he's pretty much carried out, to give away 99% of his wealth to what he sees as good causes. And he also said at the end of the book, well, this is a quote, it's a biography, not an autobiography, that he realises now that the most important thing in life is that the people that he loves love him.
Exactly.
And I think that it just shows there's someone very driven, they become multi-billionaire, and yet they come back to very deep human values.
You had two British songwriter poets here that did it pretty well. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Beatles,
Yeah.
Beautiful song. And I'm glad Warren Buffett came to that, because when a man like that, who's a prophet for profligacy, when he is the icon, an icon, or one of the premier icons for wealth, says, I want to be loved and to love. I hope more people will listen to him, you know. But right now, it's all about more and more money, because money's going to buy me what? Freedom. But it doesn't. It doesn't buy you freedom. What buys you freedom is that when the abysmal feelings come, when the really difficult feelings come, you don't contract into self-pity, into anger, into self-protection, or into aggressiveness. That's freedom. And when love comes, you don't say, look at me, I'm such a wonderful person filled with love. You go, thank you, because I know this too will pass, like the weather. You know.
One thing that interested me, I was looking at your website earlier today, and you said on there you used to have your own international community for 10 years, but you closed it down because it was dangerous to your own psychological health.
Yeah, I think probably an intentional community in the sense. It was a bit international. There were people from different
I wrote
parts.
down international. It's actually intentional, is it?
Well,
Okay.
there was a group of people who so respected what I was doing, they wanted to help me do it.
Okay.
And so we came together. And then there were about 20 or so that were helping me do what I did, and there were about a dozen or so more that lived in the local town. But what was unhealthy was, in the beginning, they were donating their time. And that I didn't like. So then I started paying them, because I felt every single person should get rewarded for energy they put out. I don't believe in communities where you volunteer for the spiritual master and you work for free, because somehow by being near her or him, you absorb some sort of spiritual juice and you accelerate your evolution. Too self-serving for the master. They don't know how to say no to us. These people found a way to rationalize my stupidity and talk about it as if it was some sort of conscious process. That was psychologically unhealthy. I realized, first of all, at a certain point when I'm paying everybody, now I have to make so much money from my programs that I'm doing my programs more driven than allowing it to unfold with the flow of life. So I let it go.
Yeah.
I let it go, and I married a woman who had 3 kids, and I dived into family life, and I've been a stepfather to those 3 children. They're now adults, and now I'm a grandfather through those kids. I have no children of my own, but it was unhealthy because no one could say no, not really. Do you know what I mean? Who says no to Rajneesh? Who says no to the Dalai Lama? I mean, who says no to any of these spiritual? Who says, no, I don't think your consciousness is clear on that? I disagree. And you know, it's in the story of the Buddha that one of the men who was taking care of him, I don't remember the name of that man, but was not considered in the legends of the Buddha to be enlightened or awakened, was the one that argued for the Buddha to let women into the Sangha. And you know what the Buddha said? If I let women into the Sangha, a teaching that would last for thousands of years will deteriorate in 300 or 400 years like mildew rotting a blanket. Right?
Yeah.
But yet it was, who was it? It was, I think, his wife's sister who traveled all the way, because Buddha was married and left that family, who traveled all the way to him and said, I want to study with you. And he said, nope, don't take women. And then this old guy that's helping him says, but don't you teach that this teaching is for all sentient beings? Why isn't it for women? And finally the Buddha broke down. But in the canon of that time, the prescriptions for women are amazing. When a woman is seated in a Sangha and a male walks into the room, even if it's a new initiate who's 14 years old, the 60-year-old woman has to stand. If a woman wants to go on retreat, she has to get permission from a man. But if a man wants to go on retreat, he doesn't need permission from anyone, right? And it's a list of these things. So, in fact, if you compare the Buddhists at that time to the Hebrews, they were absolutely liberated in terms of women. If you compare them to other religions of the time, they were ahead of their time. But there was enormous unconsciousness even then, and we have enormous unconsciousness now that we don't see, and someday we'll see it. And the basic way we're getting our unconsciousness reflected to us right now is through nature, through what we're killing, through what we can't replace, through global warming. We can't see ourselves, so we have to get slapped in the face by life, by nature.
It's not a very intelligent process that we're putting ourselves through in terms of the planet. You're right, we're getting slapped very much. I just wanted to give you a few minutes at the end to talk about your new book, The Mandala of Being. What actually is the message in that book?
Well, I've been saying it a little bit. The Mandala of Being came out in 2007. It's pretty much the summary of everything I've learned at that point of nearly 30 years of teaching and journeying. But the heart of it is simply that when you leave the present moment, there's only 4 ways you can disappear. All those 4 ways are the very nature of ego. You go into the past, you go into the future, you go into stories about yourself, and you go into stories about others. The stories about ourselves make us special. Either special inflated, grandiose, or special deflated, depressive. They're just thoughts. And in the newest book, which will come out, as I said, in February of 2011, that book called Inside Out Healing, Transforming Your Life Through the Power of Presence, is basically saying the worst thing that ever is going to happen to you isn't what actually happens. It's what you tell yourself about what happens. And here's how to learn to start over in the present moment, even if you've had a stroke, even if you're in the midst of a divorce, or even if you've become paralyzed. Here is how you take a journey deeper to yourself, no matter what the circumstances are. And to me, that's pragmatic.
So there's always a new starting point, you're saying?
Always, always, always. And
because that's hard to realise when you're in, I know even for myself, it's hard to realise when I'm in a crisis, there's a new starting point.
Well, for example, the new starting point right now, let's say someone's listening to us and they're in terrible pain. The starting point is not to think about your pain. It's not even to name your pain. It's to take your awareness and come gently, gently, gently toward this pain and touch it really, really softly. And as you do, realize that your mind, like the sun, shines infinitely without limit. You know, we think about the sun shining in space, but all we think about is sunlight on our planet. You're out in space someplace, you see the Earth. Well, look at those photographs of the astronauts took from the moon of the Earth. But every single square centimeter of space for 1 million light years is filled with, for 4.4 million light years, is filled with the light of our sun everywhere, you know? You just don't see it. Just like you don't see awareness, you don't see it unless you look at the sun or you look at the earth. So the point I'm making is stay spacious, stay big, but stay with that feeling. Right now, you know, if we were to do a meditation, I would say, here's a meditation about how to deal with difficult feeling. You know, and I think you said there might be a chance to do such a meditation.
We're going to do a meditation after the program.
Yeah. So I'll do a meditation on how to stay with difficult feeling.
Yeah.
Because this is where you start, right now. And the problem is, if you tell yourself a story about the future, you'll scare yourself silly or you'll get hopeful.
So it's a
It'll
question
be false hope.
It's a question of watching the story start to come and then catching it and just not energizing the story.
When you're dealing with difficult feeling, it's exactly what you've just said. Catch the story and don't go. When you're dealing with emotions like jealousy, anger, rage, resentment, guilt, those are emotions are created by thoughts. You cannot have jealousy without thought. You cannot have envy without thought. You cannot have depressive, I'm not worthy, I'm not attractive, I'm not good looking, without thought. Those emotions do not exist without thought, but feeling exists without thought. Feeling is a much bigger category. Emotion is this little category inside of feeling. Okay? When the very difficult feelings are present, do not think. When the emotions like jealousy and rage and anger are present, figure out what you're thinking.
Yeah,
and that's what my book teaches. It literally teaches you.
For instance, when anger's starting to run, do you let it run or do you say, I shouldn't be angry? How do you approach it?
There's 2 kinds of anger. Okay. You're trespassing on me. You're completely treating me stupidly. And I say, stop. I'm not going to be shamed by you. 5 seconds later, I'm completely at peace in myself and it's clear. That's healthy anger. If you're still angry a minute later, that's resentment. And that is unhealthy anger, and that's perpetuated by thinking. Okay,
So it's the length that the anger runs.
Right. Right. But jealousy never runs without thinking. Envy never runs without thinking. Guilt cannot run without thinking. Nostalgia cannot run without thinking. Fearful thoughts about the future only because you're thinking. Hopeful thoughts, eager, ebullient thoughts about the future, feelings about the future, emotions about the future, only because you're thinking. The emotional world is destructive, unintelligent, stupid, and we must take control of it, which is what these last two books, The Mandala of Being and the book Inside Out Healing, are all about. But feeling is healthy, feeling is essential, feeling is absolutely essential, and we have lost the ability to feel. Psychologically, we could call that the loss of the feminine side of our psychology. I'm not talking about the loss of femininity in a woman. I'm talking about it as both in a woman and as a man. It's this loss of the capacity for deep feeling, whether the feeling is transcendent ecstatic oneness, or the feeling is the most dark and abysmal feelings. Those places you must not think. You have to use awareness. But when you are jealous, resentful, angry, in that kind of resentful, goes on and on, that you have to take control of. You have to say, what am I telling myself about me, about you, about the past or the future that's making me resentful, that's making me jealous, that's making me nostalgic? Well, it's nice to have positive nostalgia for a few minutes. In the meantime, life as it is right now, you're not seeing it. So, okay, get quiet. Have a lovely fantasy about someone you had a nice time with for a few minutes. But otherwise, you're just watching an internal television that's putting you to sleep.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. Not if you really want to be alive. So that's what I try to do in my teaching. It's what I try to do I try to help people become emotionally clear, get rid of this stupidity created by your thinking, and I try to help them become alive at the level of feeling by not turning feeling into thinking.
Okay, we need to finish there. I've really enjoyed our talk. It's gone very fast, as I thought it would.
Yeah, it always does.
Absolutely.
And great, you've brought out a lot in me, and I'm grateful.
Thank you. I'm going to hold up again the Black Butterfly. I know you've mentioned your two newer books, but I really enjoyed this, and I really recommend this book. I got a lot out of reading this book. So thank you, Richard. Thank you again for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you again soon.
Thank you, Ian.
Goodbye.
Hello, friends. My name is Richard Moss. I'm here on Conscious TV, and I'd like to share with you a short meditation on letting yourself become big enough to hold even the most difficult and dark feelings. When the American president Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office shortly after the beginning of the Great Depression, he told the American people, and through that all the way to the world, that the only thing to fear is fear itself. And my experience as I journey is that what stops most of us from going forward in our lives is feelings that we are afraid of, feelings that we don't know what to do with. So in this meditation, I'd like you to stop for a moment and think about the kinds of places in your life where you become afraid of abandonment or loss, you become afraid of not succeeding. These are the stories you tell yourself, that it's a fear of abandonment, or a fear of loss, or a fear of aloneness, or a fear of not being loved, a fear of not being wanted. But the actual sensation. So if you close your eyes and you realize that you have this blessed gift of awareness, and that awareness has two qualities. It allows you to become precisely focused, but it also allows you to stay open, big, extended. So what I've learned to do in myself, and what I've been able to teach many, many people, is how to hold very dark or difficult feeling. So here's what you learn to do. Slow your breath down a little bit. Turn your inner gaze toward whatever this is that's disturbing you, that's scaring you. And you're going to stay with it. But you're not going to fall into it and collapse into it. You're going to guard yourself against letting your mind think. You're not going to let yourself say, don't say, I have felt this before. Do an experiment. Make believe that this feeling that you're calling fear or loneliness or abandonment or betrayal is actually something you've never felt before, which of course is true from the point of view of awareness. This moment is always new. So turn your gaze toward it, and like with a feather-soft touch, keep that inner gaze on this feeling, whatever feeling it is, this difficult feeling, this feeling of threat or dread, or the fear of that you're going to lose yourself. Whatever this dark feeling is that stops you from really trusting life and going forward in life. You just start breathing softly, touch it softly, and at the same time become aware of your whole body. Feel your feet, feel your legs, notice your breathing. Touching softly this feeling and extend into, let's say you're in a room or if you're outside in nature, extend out. Listen. Listen to the sounds that are around you. Hear. Smell. Everywhere in the universe right now, it's now. So extending your awareness, getting expansive, and yet precisely focused on this feeling, and relax in your body. Relax, focus on this difficult feeling, and get bigger. Bigger than the room, bigger than the house that you're in, bigger than the city. Another way to get bigger is to realize that if you're afraid or alone, there are millions of people right now on planet Earth that are feeling afraid and alone. And the recognition that you're feeling this dark, difficult, scary feeling is not just yours, that others struggle with it too, and so that your work with this feeling in some way respects that others feel it, and it helps them take a deeper step toward this feeling. So you're focused and you're open and spacious. And your breath is slow and your body relaxes. And when the mind says, but I felt this before, you go, thank you. That's just a story based on the past. I'm not going to listen. When your mind says, when is this going to stop, which is your mind going into the future, you say, no, I'm going to stay right here. This gaze, this touch. Breathing. Listening. Listening. What are the sounds? Get your senses really acute, expansive, staying open. It's like the sun. It shines on the earth, but it shines out limitlessly into space. Your aware mind shines on this fear, this dark feeling, this scary feeling, but it also shines out into now, into other sounds, into your whole body, beyond your body. So if you can stay spacious and keep relaxing, and if you don't tell yourself a story that this is a bad feeling, that you shouldn't feel this, that there's something wrong with you because you feel this, and instead you just breathe, hold the feeling, touch it softly, very softly. Anything we touch gently and compassionately and softly, we are bigger than that. It takes a spacious mind to be soft. Small minds are aggressive and tough and hard. Spacious minds are soft. So be very soft and relax and make space. I know from my own experience that there are sometimes feelings that you think are so overwhelming that you could tell yourself the story, I'll lose my mind. This is unbearable. It's not true. Your aware self is bigger than any feeling. So breathe slowly, get bigger, relax, expand, stay with the feeling, softly touching it, and without thought, feeling always changes. You have to think to keep a feeling locked. A feeling that seems blocked means you keep thinking about it, you keep judging it, you keep saying, I don't want it. This is a wrong feeling. That's what locks it in. That's what keeps you blocked. So just get bigger. Relax. Touch this feeling very, 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 very softly, like a feather. Breathe slowly. Soften in your body. And the feeling will pass through. Now, we've been running from these feelings since we were children, so it takes a little time to learn that you're bigger than any feeling, no matter how difficult, no matter how threatening. But I promise you, from 35, 40 years of experience, there is nothing bigger than your aware self. You can be gentle with the most frightening feeling, and once you learn to do this, you won't be afraid of people, you won't be afraid that they'll hurt you, you won't be afraid of success. Even big feelings of love, many of us are afraid to feel joy, real joy. We're afraid to feel love. So when you feel this tremendous sense of love or joy or gratitude, just touch it softly. The ego will say, I want more of this, but don't listen to your ego, because as soon as you want to hold on to joy, the joy will go away. Joy will go away anyway, but let it flow on like weather. The dark feelings come, you make space for them. The joyous feelings come, you make space for them. And this way, you become very rich in who you are. You're not impersonal, you're not dissociated. Something becomes so alive inside of you. Focus, spacious. Ready, like a martial artist before a contest. Relaxed like a baby. It's paradoxical when we use this kind of language, but this is the way you make space for the dark feelings. This is how you make space for dread and fear and aloneness and grief and joy and extraordinary love. Most of us have no idea how vast we can be, just how tremendously full we can become with the feeling that is the fullness of life. So learn to touch softly, and stay open, stay big. Stay in the now, because the now is everywhere. Practice this, it'll change your life, and I'm grateful for the blessing of being able to share this with you. Thank you very much.